Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Elvya, titled Untold Stories. So I'll occasionally get plenty of requests from you guys to review albums, but sometimes the bands or new acts will just outright send over their new albums for me to cover them. And for the most part, I try to get a chance to listen to everything. But between my existing backlog and all the preparation I do for listening to more established artists, I just run out of time to do videos and cover everything, even if I like a lot of what I hear. Plus, considering I do a lot of lyrical analysis, it can be a little bit exasperating when there's no lyric sheet or additional details provided beyond just the songs, especially if the mixing is poor and the lyrics are unclear. That's a little bit of advice for anybody who's an aspiring artist looking to send me music to review. So when I got the email about Elvya, I wasn't initially planning to do much about it until I caught some choice details in the message. Full name Elvya Dulcimer. Her music is reportedly more in the vein of Celtic folk that was on the more cinematic side, with this being her debut album, with narration from Arjen Lucassen, the mastermind behind the progressive metal project Arion. If I know anything about Arjen, even though he didn't produce this, I didn't exactly love the gentle storm that he did with Anneke van Giersbergen earlier this year. This guy's got an eye for quality. This could be really something special. On top of that, former with Instrumentation and current Kingfisher Sky member Ivar de Graaf was handling the guitars and the drums. So I had every reason to believe this could be incredible. So I decided to check out Elvya's debut, Untold Stories. How is it? Well, it wasn't what I was expecting, that's for damn sure. Folks, without a doubt, this may be one of the oddest albums that I've covered thus far in 2015. The sort of album that leaves me scrabbling for comparisons because it seems to inhabit its own unique ecosystem. The closest I can get is maybe somewhere between Vena Tang and early Imogen Heap, a blend of spacious and gorgeously melodic folk peppered with the woodwinds you'd hear on an early Arion album that sound wonderfully organic, and even some rough-edged beats that wouldn't be out of place coming from Bjork. The best words that I could describe would probably be fey or elven or other worldly, but even on some level, that doesn't even feel adequate to me. As such, it's a really tough album for me to evaluate, to the point where I'm definitely sure I like it, and I will recommend it, but it's hard to gauge by how much I really like it, or whether or not it's really going to stick with me in the long term. But the best place to start would be the instrumentation and the production, and right from Arjen Lucassen's hushed delivery and opening to a misty, chimes-accented intro with a throat-singing swell beneath it, it's clear we're getting material that's drenched in the iconography of Celtic folk, with a certain cinematic swell that definitely can be linked back to Enya or Howard Shore's score for Lord of the Rings. And while I do feel the percussion and the drums are a little bit sparse and muffled for my preference, I mean, I tend to prefer Rohan and Gondor over Rivendell and Lothlorien anyway, if I'm going to get totally nerdy about it. There's a certain pristine, almost operatic power to Elvya's vocals, and the clarion call, the tin whistle against the plucked Celtic harp. And sure, I prefer my folk with a little bit more of a ragged edge, a little bit more of that fire, but I can appreciate the pure beauty of songs like this. And then, about 4 tracks in, we get the faintest hint of a static touched beat to supplement the melody, which despite the strings seems even more brittle and crystalline in the mix. And at first I thought it was a flaw in the recording quality, to be honest, but after the tinkling strings heavy track Remember, that beat seemed to return against the pianos to try to listen, this time being slightly more distant, a track that reminded me a lot of Memories by Within Temptation, which is only a good thing because that song's fantastic. And then after another tinkling interlude, it came back in force, with the piano sounding almost lo-fi against the choppy stutter of more broken effects, almost reflecting something more industrial, with even the reverb around Elvya's vocals feeling even more harshly mechanical. And then without warning, all that seemed to fade as both Daddy and Alva 2 use more acoustic guitars, strings, and organic instrumentation, with only synthetic hints fluttering around the background as effects. And for the latter case, the mix seemed to go for outright cinematic swell, with the male backing vocals, the crystal clear plucked guitar, and the gentle accordion before the full strings arrangement comes in. It strikes me as a bit of a weird inclusion, those effects. And if it didn't fit incredibly well with the instrumentation as sort of like a folktronica sort of way, it would definitely feel out of place on an otherwise pretty organic record. Even though, yes, it's not quite as textured and rough-edged as I usually prefer. And you know what? The inclusion is a choice which did kind of confuse me. For as much as this album floats in ethereal tones and it goes part of the way with some of the rougher woodwinds and strings, it never really develops a significant foundation in the low end in terms of its groove in order to support some of those crystal clear melodies. And I think it can make the sound feel a little bit colder and more austere than it was really intended. It doesn't help matters that this feels pretty thin for a debut. Of 13 tracks, 2 of them are the intro and outro, 3 are instrumental interludes, and 3 aren't even in English. We'll come back to this. And considering how fleeting that electronic piece is, it feels like some of the ideas could have been expanded upon to match and support the extremely strong clarion tones that Elvya brings to the table vocally. I'll definitely give her this. She can sing. And the multi-tracking proves excellent to match that cinematic or symphonic vibe. But on some tracks, the instrumentation just doesn't do enough to really support her, especially in the percussion and groove, electronic or otherwise. This takes leads us to the lyrics and the themes. Now remember how I said 3 songs weren't in English? Yeah, they aren't in any language that you'd recognize, fantasy or otherwise. Turns out Elvya created her own language and helpfully provided a translation in the liner notes that sounds somewhere between Italian, Latin, and Dutch, but really is of its own entity. Now I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, it's an awfully convenient way to write songs without having to construct conventional poetry, but on the other hand, it does flow well. It's got marginally consistent syntax. It's not like Tolkien didn't do it. And on the topic of Lord of the Rings, it's stark how much Elvya draws from similar themes, especially about environmentalism, at least on the surface. The album is titled Untold Stories, and it becomes clear that the fantasy realm that Elvya is creating has some pretty potent real-life undertones, particularly surrounding the systemic neglect of Mother Nature. And yet there are other songs you can tell there was more of a personal narrative here, like the attempted gentle breakup on Lavor Gente, the toxic situation of Leave Me, and most straightforwardly, the complicated Please Come Back on Daddy, which is really sort of an awkward word to anchor this sort of song. It just feels too informal to me. And on some extent, this album descends into abstraction very quickly. As Elvya said, many of the songs were inspired by her dreams. And I completely buy that, because some of these tracks don't make a lot of sense at all outside of dream logic. Remember is probably the most glaring case here, as I think it's representative of a breakup utilizing death as a metaphor, and it kind of fits the surprisingly intimate feel of the writing, but here's my frustration. This is an album that from Elvya's delivery to the instrumentation is capable of some huge emotions, and when it focuses on the more starkly defined environmental themes like on Nature and Gover Vena and Try to Listen or On Vatu, it works incredibly well. It's talking about our relationship with the world around us. It should sound big and operatic and symphonic, but I'm left wondering how much of these songs are trying to tell more of that personal narrative hidden behind abstraction, or whether or not they were just about those larger-than-life concepts on their own right. What I'm trying to say is that the writing can feel kind of unclear and a little bit vague, and when the music can hit with such incredible impact, not having broad clarity even in the writing can be a real setback, especially when the writing on this album is as thin as it is. Now, I might sound like I'm coming down really hard on this album, but the truth is, I really did find Untold Story to be something incredibly special and defiantly unique, with a gift for melody and atmosphere that I haven't heard in a long time outside of in other incredibly unique cases like Algiers blending gospel with post-punk, or Casualties of Cool combining country with progressive ambience. And in this case, the album definitely has niche appeal. I made comparisons to Vena, Tang, and Image and Heat before, but probably a better comparison to be a more Faye Lindsay Sterling. I just wish the atmosphere was a little bit more grounded, had some tighter grooves, the writing told more stories. But I'm not going to deny that there's a singular talent and unique voice to this album that I really do think is something special. For me, it's an 8 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. But again, I get if this might not be your thing. I've been a fantasy nerd for 15 years and I own swords mounted on my walls on the side of here. This stuff resonates with me on a primal level. But I reckon you give this a chance, you try to listen, it might just click with you too. Count on that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yes, I'll be getting to the J-Rock album. It's up next. But until then, if there's anything else you want me to review, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.